Good evening, everyone. I just want to thank you so much for coming out to the new garden and to our program tonight. I hope you all keep coming back to see how it grows. It's been a long time coming, as a lot of you know. Let's not beat around the bush, but I'd like to introduce our first speaker tonight. She is a pioneer in native plant gardening in Ohio. When her husband was our governor, she took on the special project of creating a garden where visitors can see all of Ohio in one place and take away ideas for their own yards. Her creation was the Heritage Garden at the governor's residence, which represents the different ecoregions of Ohio. It gives me great pleasure to introduce someone I consider my mentor and friend, Mrs. Hope Taft.
When I made the slideshow, that's very short, but full of maps, that I was going to be in this big an auditorium. So if you all would like to move closer to the screens and to the front, you might be able to see a little better, because my font is not so large that I could see it in the back of the room. So if you want to move up, please do. It'll make me feel more comfortable. As I was thinking about this, Lynette wanted me to talk about the Native Plant Month and the importance of the Heritage Garden in starting making the use of native plants more available and more desirable. Because like many of you, when I move to a new place, I like to know what is growing there. And that first fall, we wanted to entertain outside when it was finally cool enough to do so, but there wasn't anything blooming because it was all something that had come in from a nursery. And I thought, oh, this is not going to work. What can I do? And I love spring ephemerals. In fact, when we had contact with the new staff that was going to come in and help me survive 8 years, I said I love native plants and I loved spring ephemerals. And so he went out, the horticulturist at that time went out and bought a box of seeds and threw them in one corner of the yard. And it was nice, but not exactly what I had in mind. And so that first fall, when nothing was really looking very good, I invited a friend from Cincinnati to come up and help me. His name was Dewey Hollister, and he knows everything about plants anywhere in the world. And he came through the garden gate and said, oh, what you need are native plants because they bloom from early spring to late fall. And I said, oh, do I? And he said, yes, you do. And so we sat down and mapped out different parts of the yard that we could turn into little vignettes of the physiographic regions of the state. And that was really the beginning of the Heritage Garden at the governor's residence, because people that would come through the house were very excited when they would see something from their part of the state. But when they went outside, it looked like any residential garden you could see anywhere in the state. And so one night, it kind of dawned on me that we could do outside what we had done inside. If we focused on the native plants of Ohio, we could make people feel at home when they went outside, as well as at home when they were inside. In the first rendition of the Heritage Garden, people who were from southern Ohio would get very, very excited when they would turn a corner and see the sand dunes and see prickly pear cactus growing, because they had no idea that you could find such plants in Ohio. And one of the people that helped me install a lot of the plants kind of said what Lynette said, that you could travel the state of Ohio in 45 minutes by going through our backyard. And so we will talk about that, but we will talk about more about the need for native plants, because probably like you all, I like to eat. And you know, if you don't have native plants to feed those pollinators, you're not going to get much to eat because they pollinate about 30% of what we put in our mouths. And if we don't have clean water to go with our food, we're in really bad shape. And we need to protect both here in Ohio so that we can leave it in good shape for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. So that gives you a little background of where I'm coming from. And you can see from the slide there that I have a picture of the prairie in the Heritage Garden, plus a picture of a little bee on a milkweed to link sort of the pollinators and the native plants and why they need to go together so closely. And we'll go with the second slide, and we will go on a journey of how Ohio looks like it, why Ohio looks like it does. So I don't know what I'm supposed to do with the slides today. Okay, there you are. Okay. Somewhere, there's supposed to be a slide of this ancient land we call Ohio. But they seem to be having a hard time growing it up, pulling it up. So while they're trying to work that out, let's talk a little bit more about what pollinators need, what you can do in your own yard to make pollinators happy, which is basically to plant flowers, and particularly native flowers, and rewild your area. Oh, good, there's a slide. Can you find Ohio in the middle of it? That's why I wanted you all to move close. And you will see a brown area close to the dark blue. That is one of the areas that are now the Appalachian Mountains. Did you know that we're on about our 4th rendition of the Appalachian Mountains, and that when you make something comes up, it makes a hollow and then another little up. And you will see that second little brown spot is about where Cincinnati is, about southern Ohio, and that's known as the Cincinnati Arch, which is famous for its fossils, because at one time, probably before this, all of Ohio was covered with a shallow sea and left lots of sea creatures there to become fossils. And I'm looking at my little screen here, and it's got a line through it, so I'm not quite sure what I'm seeing. But I think that's the basic things to know about the land we call Ohio and how it was formed a long time ago. So can we do number 3? The next slide. There we are. This shows you the bedrock of Ohio. And that pink part is the Cincinnati Arch that I talked about in the last slide. And it's the oldest bedrock that's closest to the surface in Ohio. And then the bedrock gets younger as you go east. So the brown part is the youngest bedrock, even though to my mind it should be the oldest, but things don't go from that way when you come to geology. And you'll see a yellow stripe up the middle. That's the Columbus limestone piece of bedrock. And generally, it and 71, which runs right along that way, divide the state into 2 parts. And the green part, the part that's the west, is more alkaline than the part to the east. The blue part is more acid. And that's really important when you think about what you want to plant in your yard, because some plants really like acid soil and some really like alkaline soil. If you live in the alkaline area and you try to grow rhododendron, you'll have lots of problems. So my advice is try something else. The whole idea is to work with nature instead of against nature. so that your plants will grow and be successful, and so that you will have lots of food for those pollinators. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Well, there should be a map with that one. Let's go to the next slide. See if you can get a map. Okay, that's a map of what the glaciers did to the state, and how it changed the topography of our state. The light yellow part is Appalachia, and it's the part that was too rough for the glaciers to cover, and so it's pretty much natural, like it has always been. The blue part up at the top is where the Black Swamp used to be, and is composed of sand that was brought down by the Detroit River pre-glacial that blew up into those hills that you will see around Toledo. And right next to it are the islands that you all are probably familiar with, and there you'll find Alvar, which is pretty rare in the world, and it has a lot of very rare plants. In fact, it has one of our federally listed and endangered plants known as the lakeside daisy. And then east of Cleveland is the headland sand dune, which is alkaline soil sand as opposed to the acid sand that's in the oak openings. And it was brought to Ohio. Those plants that are like that alkaline headland sand dune was brought to Ohio when the glacier was so heavy that it sunk the bedrock that was under the St. Lawrence Seaway. And so you will see a lot of plants there that are more familiar to the east coast of the United States and the Atlantic Ocean. And then let's see, the green part is what later became known as the Prairie Peninsula. And there was a natural warming period between the glaciers, or after the last glaciers, that brought a lot of plants from the west into Ohio, and it gives us our prairie plants and our best agricultural area. And there's a little brown area down at the bottom. That's the interior low plateau. It represents the southernmost part of our state and plants that you might find in the state, and you might find in Kentucky and even down to Arkansas, where I'm from. The blue part, the oak openings part, is the part of the state that has the most listed and endangered plants in Ohio, and the brown part has the second most. And let's see, up in the northeastern part of the state, we have the glaciated Allegheny Plateau, which brings in plants on the ancient Pittsburgh River that inhabits that area. So we have plants from all over the country, really, in Ohio, and that is because we are on the edge of a lot of what they call physiographic regions of the country, and that makes our plants a little more delicate than if you went to the middle of those physiographic regions. Any questions? If you have any questions, please ask, because it's easier to point at a map and tell you than not. This is the map of what they thought Ohio looked like when the pioneers came, and I think the next speaker is going to give you even a more detailed rendition of this, because the state is redoing this map and basing it on the survey results of what the earliest surveyors found in the state. But you can see the pink area is basically the Appalachian area. The green area is basically the Till Plains, the Prairie Peninsula, and it basically follows the bedrock and the glacial map. And let's see what the next map is. So if you take the three together and you make it simple, which I need, you come up with this physiographic map of the 5 major regions of the state. And there again, you can see where the yellow goes up into the state, into Adams County, and the pink and the brown and the green meet. And that's why it has so many different varieties of plants and so many listed endangered species in the state. And this is basically the map that the Heritage Garden at the Governor's Residence is based on. We took samples of each one of those regions and made a little area in the Heritage Garden to help you visualize what you might see if you traveled your state. Now, my suggestion would be to come to the Heritage Garden, but also to get a map from the Department of Natural Resources on their natural areas and preserves, and take a look at and go to each one of those, or at least a good sample of those, so that you can see the native plants, how they grow in their natural habitats. And then the next one. Okay, because those natural habitats, those physiographic regions are do just not stop at our borders, but they spread out over the continent. And this map kind of shows you how Ohio is situated in some of the physiographic regions. And I think the next slide will make it easier to understand if you're far away. Yes, this is a slide of the United States and the physiographic regions in the country, and you can see how Ohio has a lot of the different areas in our boundaries, and why we're on the edge of a lot of different areas, and why we are crossroads of the United States, not only in the traffic and in canals and in rivers, but also in plants. And there. Oh, this one is on the climate map of the state, and how, although it was done in 2005, it gives you an idea of the state as it was then. And if I could find a newer model, but I couldn't, you would see that those lines have changed because, as we all know, climate is changing, and that also has to do with what plants will like where you put them. And the next slide. There's the master plan of the Heritage Garden. And in the backyard in particular, we have a little section that gives you the idea of what a sand dune might look like, or what the headland sand dune might look like, as opposed to the oak openings, and what difference does an acid or an alkaline soil make. And it also gives you an example of a prairie. In fact, I call it the jewel of the garden, because instead of being big, it's very small. And we have a bog there, and we have a fen there, and we have a lot of smaller areas that represent smaller ecoregions of the state. And I think Lynette wanted me to talk about the Ohio Native Plant Month, which is April, and that's Governor DeWine signing the bill. That's about one sentence long, that encourages you to plant native plants, and encourages industry to talk about native plants at least once a year. And I would like to encourage you to go to your industry, wherever you buy plants, and ask what they have that are native plants, because that's how they will have more for you to use in your garden and around. Although, if you go to the website, Ohio Native Plant Month, you will find a list of a lot of sources of native plants that are not the big 5 or 6 that you find around the state, but the state is really pretty well populated by native plants, and I have a feeling you're going to hear more about that from the next speaker. But the reason that it's so important that we highlight native plants is because of the food sources that they give the pollinators, and that we need to really replace invasive with native plants, and we need to not use pesticides, and we need to leave the leaves in the fall, and to turn off the lights at night so that our pollinators can live the life that they want to live. And we need to do all that we can to nurture them so that they can nurture us when you get right down to it. And I think the next slide will invite you to come visit the Heritage Garden, maybe not in the wintertime because we've kind of put it to bed, but next summer you can call at least a week in advance and get a reservation. On Wednesday, it's free. If they give 10:30 noon and 1:30 tours, and if you sign up for the 10:30 tour, you will see lots of volunteers working in the yard, and you may get me as your leader, so that'll be kind of fun. But we do have a group of about 100 volunteers. About 30 to 50 show up every Wednesday morning to help tend the garden, and so we're very fortunate that in that way to have all that kind of help to give you a chance to understand a little more about Ohio and about why what native plant might grow well in your yard. And I think that's the last one. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask, or wait until our next speaker has her chance, and then you can ask either one of us. She probably doesn't know that. That sounds like it might make sense. Yes?
What's the website that has the list of native plants?
OhioNativePlantMonth.org. If you want to come visit the garden, go to friendsohio.org, and it will lead you to tours, and then you can sign up there. But OhioNativePlant.org will do that. We've even taken it national, so April is National Native Plant Month, but it has to be redone every year because it's a resolution. We can't pass a law. And there is the National Native Plant Month website, too, that can give you a lot of good information.
In your picture, I'm just curious, what is your definition of how long a plant needs to have been in Ohio to be a native plant to belong to the Heritage Garden?
Well, usually the definition of a native plant is one that was in the state when the pioneers came. When I had that slide up with the different colors that the pioneers sang, yeah. And we usually do that. There's several areas in the Heritage Garden where we have mixed native and cultivars and non-natives, because I haven't run into anyone that wants to dig up their whole yard and plant natives yet. But maybe I will. Usually you do small areas like they've done out in front of the Historical Society, but people love their peonies or their grandma's irises or something that they don't want to get rid of. So we like to encourage people to include some natives in with their other plantings, because it's really hard and really expensive to take it all out and start again.
Is there a native that is strong enough that can be planted that can push out some of these invasive foreign plants that have been taking over?
It's a very good question. I haven't come across that one yet, other than a goat. I no longer call myself a gardener. I am a land manager, and my chief goal at my own house is to keep the invasives at bay. I don't think I'll ever get rid of them all. And there's some I've given up on, like lesser celandine, I've just kind of given up on. If you haven't discovered that plant, I pray that you don't have it ever. So thank you all very, very much for having me tonight. I hope I've given you a little bit of an idea of why you might have good luck with native plants and why you might not. A lot depends on the ecoregion that you're in, and you'll learn more about that in this particular area from our next speaker. But please, whatever you do, include some natives in your plantings so that we can nurture the pollinators, so that we can have food to nurture us. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Hope. So, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. So for 25 years, our next speaker practiced as a naturopath, which is a type of holistic healthcare provider. But as the years passed, she noticed the loss of insects and other wildlife, species, and felt called to do something about it. After reading a book by Douglas Tallamy, I'm sure we all know who that is, right? In 2019, she decided to start a native plant nursery, which gave her a platform to educate others on helping to restore wildlife habitat. Her nursery, Leaves for Wildlife, is one of only a few in this area that provide native plants to the public. And really, she has a wealth of knowledge about what creatures, especially butterflies, use the plants for food and habitat. One can spend hours at her nursery. It's a pleasure to introduce Patty Shipley.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to cheat and see what slides are coming next. And I assume I need to give you the thumbs up when you need to change the slide. Is that how that works? Okay. Well, it was great to meet Hope. I've been wanting to meet her for a long time. I don't know if everybody here knows that Ohio is the first state to have a Native Plant Month, and there are now 5 other states that have that, and then there's 8 other states that are working on something like that. So, pretty cool. Nice job. There's a lot of great people here too. Tonight is Susan King's here. She heads up the Licking County Pollinator Pathway, and then Lynn is on the board for Franklin County Pollinator Pathway, and I'm on the board for the North Central Ohio Pollinator Pathway. So there's a lot of pollinator advocates here. So I want to say a little bit more about what got me into this. 11 years ago, I bought 10 acres in Sunbury thinking I would turn it into wildlife habitat. And unfortunately, the information that is now starting to go mainstream was not mainstream at that time. And still, we have a lot more people to reach. But I really didn't know the difference between native plants and non-native plants. I was just going to the nurseries, mainstream nurseries, and picking up plants and then trying to figure out why they weren't surviving or thriving in my clay soil. They seemed to pout in the clay. And then when I could get them to thrive, I just didn't notice the type of activity around the plants that I expected. And so I kind of got discouraged. I really kind of thought, well, is it too late to plant the plants? And it's not. Once I learned about native plants and I started putting those plants into my landscape, the difference was astronomical and actually very quick. So I want to teach you guys what I've been learning, because I assume that all of you are here because you want to help nature to make a rebound, and that's basically what brought me into this. So, and I'm going to take us way back to our own episode of Jaws. Back in the Ordovician era, sorry, the next slide. I can't see what slides are up. Is it up? Okay. So we actually could film a prequel to Jaws in Ohio because about 400 million years ago, as Hope mentioned, Ohio was the entire state was under a shallow sea. And this is a fossil that has been found in the Cleveland area. And then and it's also our state fossil fish, which is kind of interesting, 20 to 30 feet long, with an armored front body. Its jaws were self-sharpening. They lovingly referred to him as the donk. And then our state fossil, invertebrate fossil, is the trilobite. So one of the things that did shape the land here was that ocean, because when the ocean receded, then what was left behind were minerals and salt. which left like a mineral lick, which a lot of animals were drawn to for the minerals. And so a lot of the native peoples that were drawn to Ohio were drawn here because of the abundance of game, because of the natural salt licks. And actually that's where Licking River and Licking County got their names. So that was kind of interesting to me. I learned a lot putting this talk together, actually. Next slide. Are we on the trilobite now? Okay, I'm going to have to remember to tell you to switch. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So Ohio, this should be a map, a colorful map. Okay, thank you. We need to move ahead to the colorful map. So Ohio was also the first state to record the vegetation of the state based on land surveyors that traveled across the nation. So if you look at the different colors, it'll tell you kind of what type of plants were living in that area at that time. And these are at the time of partly into European settlement, because European settlement started in the early 1600s, but this was, these surveys started in 1785. So there's some changes that we probably didn't capture. But think about the rugged terrain that those surveyors had to go across, and they had to wear many hats. They had to carry all their provisions. They were going across rugged terrain. They weren't able to predict the weather then, so they had to kind of account for different possibilities. There were wild animals to contend with. There were also a lot of tensions between native peoples and the settlers. So land surveyors were actually kind of amazing, really. They were explorers, they were geographers, they were botanists, and dealing with all of those challenges. So we're going to circle back to this map in a minute, but I wanted to move on to kind of like I want to pick up kind of what started to shape where we are today. So during the time when European settlers, good job. During the time when European settlers were colonizing here, they started to bring seeds over. So some of the earliest seeds that were brought over were grasses, we'll talk about. And these plants here were all introduced from different countries. And actually, every single one of these is now an invasive species in Ohio. So if you have these in your yard, I highly recommend removing them. But what happens when you have a plant that can handle our conditions and thrives in our conditions, but it doesn't belong here, is it doesn't tend to have the pressures, the biological pressures on them that our native plants do, so they tend to take over and crowd out the native species that our wildlife and pollinators need. So next slide. So turf grasses, they were one of the earliest introductions in the mid-1600s by European immigrants as a way to feed their livestock. So all these different turf grasses are the ones that you'll typically see in a yard here somewhere in the United States. And they were introduced as lawn grasses because they could be trimmed short. They lent themselves well to that. The next slide. So about 100 years later, in the mid-1700s, wealthy landowners were becoming influenced by a European aristocracy. And they began dedicating some of the land around their mansions, their estates, to grass, because it was kind of like a way of saying, I have so much money, then I can have land just sitting here doing nothing but looking pretty. And they often managed that with either grazing animals or slaves and staff that would use sickles, scythes, and shears to keep that grass. Can you imagine how awful that would be? And then in 1830, the mechanical mower was introduced. And that made, the early model was expensive and clunky, but then as they refined that in the late 1800s, it became more affordable, and then everyone could afford it. Next slide. So that kind of brings us to present day when we're looking at what a typical lawn looks like. So a typical lawn is non-native turf grass and non-native foundation plantings around the house and maybe some beds. And that, I have noticed that Granville, one of the things I love about Granville is that you guys are ahead of many of the areas around here where there's a lot more native plants in the foundations here, and a lot of your trees are still native. And I know Susan's done a lot of work with getting some changes made there to, I think it's city codes, where they plant native trees now when they're replacing the trees. But I want to talk about why turf grass is such a detriment to wildlife. Wildlife basically sees it as a green desert. And it's not just the fact that there's nothing there for them to eat, it's also a big source of toxicity. If you look at, it's an hour of gas-powered mowing produces as much pollution as 4 hours of driving a car. We use 800 million gallons of gas every year running lawn equipment, and every year we put 100 million pounds of chemicals on our lawns, and all of that stuff washes into our watershed and ends up in our waterways, our rivers, and our lakes. So let's go back to the map that we talked about before. I'm sorry, I'm very bad at telling you when to change, I think. So the next map, we're gonna come back to this, and then now we're gonna zoom in on the next slide to, I think the wrong direction. One more maybe? Yes. So I've basically zoomed in here on Licking County so you could see what the color coding brings up. So basically what was here at the time of the surveyors, around the time when the European settlement was really settling in, beech, oak, hickory, maple, elm, ash, and tulip trees. So, and I see that you guys do still have a lot of those here. And those are the species that make up the overstory. I want to talk about, in the next slide, the species that make up the understory. So the understory, according to surveyor notes, were roughleaf dogwood, arrowwood viburnum, spicebush, winterberry, sumac. Those were some of the most abundant species. There were certainly other species here. Grasses and flowering forbs are in the right column there. Again, certainly many more species than that, but those were some of the predominant species that were seen here. And then I put next to some of these, some of the different uses that the native peoples had for those specific plants. So the next slide, what I want to talk about tonight is basically how we put in plants from the past to help us thrive into the future. Because not only does wildlife need the native plants, we also do too. So the next slide. So I want to talk about, okay, that's out of order, but I will say that native plants are not all created equally. About 5% of the, oh no, that's not the slide, sorry. 5% of the land in the US is protected as wilderness. About 60% across the nation is privately owned, but in Ohio, 96% of our land is privately owned. So it really does it lands on landowners to really make the effort to rewild and restore habitat. So let's go to the next slide. And the next slide. So we're going to talk about how do we make backyard habitat. So nature has basically the same needs that we have, all the same 5 needs. They need food to eat, they need shelter from inclement weather, they need water, they need places to breed, and they need diversity. You wouldn't be healthy if you ate one food, and neither are pollinators or any species in wildlife. They need some diversity. I put insects in red because insects are really the little things that run the world. And as far as nature goes, on the next slide, you'll see that nature, pretty much everything in nature, all the species in nature are going to rely either directly on a native plant or on the insects that feed on the native plants. And we've been kind of conditioned to be, fearful or reviled by insects, but we actually need them too, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I want to mention in the next slide that chickadees, does anybody know how many caterpillars it takes to feed a nest of baby chickadees? A lot, 6,000 to 9,000. Those are small birds. And when the babies fledge the nest, they don't immediately start hunting for caterpillars on their own. They're still needing help from the parent for a few more weeks. So if you really want to see birds in your yard, especially reproducing birds, baby birds, then you do need caterpillar food. You need a lot of caterpillar food. And then in insects in general. And insects they're incredibly important to us as well as to wildlife. Pollination, Hope mentioned that, and all the pollinator pathway representation here. Pollination is a big deal. 75% of the flowering plants on Earth require pollinators to help them reproduce and set seed. Insects are required for decomposition. If we didn't have decomposers, then when things died, they would just lay around and build up. So they help to break things down, and that's part of the nutrient recycling process, putting the nutrients back into the soil for the plants to take them back up. It's almost like nature knew what she was doing. They also participate in helping us to clean the air and the water by helping the plants that do those jobs. And when you have a good diversity in your yard, what I find is that the insects start to balance one another and you don't have pest problems as much. So they do help with that if there's a good balance there. So, I'm sorry, next slide. That was the slide we just went over, sorry. Next slide. Thanks for being patient, you guys. So about 90% of our plant-feeding insects are host plant specialists, which mean that they can't digest other plants. And most of the plants from other countries, our insects cannot digest them. So that's why it's so critical to restore the plants that have been historically here. Next slide. So keystone plants, has anyone heard that term before? So you know keystone in a Roman arch is the stone that basically if you remove it, the whole arch comes down. Keystone plants are basically plants that are so incredibly important that if they were to disappear from an ecosystem, that ecosystem would largely collapse because so many species rely on them. So if you look at the number that's behind each of these plants, the woody plants on the left, the number of caterpillar species that plant supports is off to the right. So you can see the oak trees are by far the most important native plant through most of the US, but definitely in Ohio. And you can see that kind of goes down from your wild plums and cherries, your willows, and then on the right, the top two hugely important perennials are goldenrods and asters, which have just finished blooming in most of our gardens. And they also supply a late season nectar source for pollinators. So the next slide, I just wanted to highlight the oak tree because not only is it a keystone plant for wildlife, it provides a lot of ecosystem services to us. Oak trees live for hundreds of years. They stabilize the soil. They sequester a lot of carbon in their roots, and they manage a lot of watershed because of their massive root systems. Next slide. And just to bring home the importance of keystone plants, 5% of our native plants support 75% of our caterpillar species. So if you include a foundation of keystone plants in your garden, you're going to have a really good start to creating habitat. 14% support 90%. So next slide. And as far as host plant specialists go, can you switch to the next slide? This is probably our most famous host plant specialization example. Most people know that monarch butterflies, their caterpillars can only eat the leaves of milkweed, correct? And there's 14 species of milkweed that are native to Ohio, but that is the only plant. If you were to put a monarch caterpillar on any other plant, it would starve to death. It cannot digest it, so it can't eat it. There's actually a couple other specialists on milkweed, next slide, that I want to talk about just because I know a lot of people that visit the nursery, they'll tell me that they are concerned about seeing these other caterpillars or these other insects on milkweed, but the studies show that when a monarch caterpillar is feeding on a plant that has a lot of insect diversity, they actually have a higher survival and they're hardier, able to handle migration better. So this is another one that you'll see on milkweed. It's a specialist. Its caterpillars can only eat milkweed, the unexpected cycnia moth. And then the next slide is milkweed tussock moth. This is the one that scares everyone the most because there's so many of them in a group. I just make sure that I have plenty of milkweed, and if there's too many on one plant, then I spread them around. which probably, I don't know, maybe it's helping them. I like to make sure that they're all going to live. They're actually a beautiful moth. You can't really tell until they spread their wings because they have that fancy bodysuit they wear. Next slide. And one of my favorites is the rosy maple moth, beautiful moth. And the point is here that if you don't have the host plant, then those insects are not going to be there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, so we talked about keystone plants. Now I want to talk a little bit about planting for specialists. My favorite specialist on the next slide is the spicebush swallowtail caterpillar. These caterpillars, they look like a cartoon. They don't even look real. In fact, the eyes, I wish I had done a better job of taking the picture. The eyes actually have a fake shine to them like they're wet, like an eyeball would be, but it's still not an eyeball. Their face is like under the green. It's actually kind of clear looking. But in fact, the next slide, you can see Pokemon actually has a character that is inspired by the spicebush swallowtail caterpillar. And in this picture, you can see the osmeterium. This is the little swallowtails. Caterpillars all have this. When they're spooked, they can stick that out at you to kind of scare you, and it puts off a scent. It smells really bad. But it makes them look even more like a little snake, which is what they're trying to look like a little green snake. And if you have spicebush shrubs in your yard, or if you see them in the woods, when I'm hiking, I'm probably one of the most annoying people on the hike because I have to stop at all the spicebush bushes and look for leaf tacos because that's where they hide. They will put silk down the center of a spicebush leaf, and that curls the leaf closed, and they hide in there. And so if you open it up, you can see them, and it's just really cool. It is cool. It makes you really popular on a hike once you find one, but not until you find one. And this is what the caterpillar looks like right before it pupates. It turns a really beautiful orange. And then on the right, you can see, sorry, next slide. And on the right, you can see the chrysalis, which blends in so well that I usually can't find them, even when they're in my butterfly enclosures. And the next slide is a picture of what the butterfly looks like, and it's feeding on what looks like maybe a button bush. And then the next slide is this is the spicebush shrub itself. It's actually a really beautiful shrub. It's very versatile. It only gets 6 to 8 feet tall, and it can be planted in full sun to full shade. It has early yellow flowers that kind of resemble our native or non-native forsythia, so a good replacement for that. Then they have red berries that persist into, I would say, late fall. The migrating birds really love the spicebush berries because they're high in fat. And they're also edible to humans, but they don't taste like what you would think of as a fruit berry. They're more of a spicy one. So you actually allow the berries to dry and crush them up, and you can use it like a cardamom. Some people use them in spice cookies, or they use it in like a chai. The next slide. Spicebush swallowtail caterpillars have one other host plant, and that's the sassafras. I have noticed, though, that when I'm growing them side by side in the nursery, they almost always choose the spicebush, so that's probably why they're named spicebush swallowtail. But sassafras is also quite beautiful. Look at its fruit, its fall foliage, its yellow flowers. It's an incredibly beautiful plant. The next slide is actually a picture of a zebra swallowtail butterfly laying eggs on a pawpaw tree at the nursery. This is the one and only time I've ever seen a zebra swallowtail at the nursery in the 11 years that I've lived on that property. It's an unusual one now. I'm trying to encourage as many people as possible to plant pawpaw trees because it is their only host plant. It's not like there's 14 different species of pawpaw. There's one species of pawpaw. It's the only plant there caterpillars can eat. So the left side is the butterfly laying egg. On the right is the egg. In the next picture, you'll see an early instar of the caterpillar, and a little bit later instar on the right. And then in the next slide, you'll see a little bit further along. And then, so I was able to follow the caterpillars all the way through. And then you see what it looks like right before pupation. And then the next slide is its chrysalis and an actual intact. This is a shutterstock photo. I only ever saw the one butterfly. It was missing both of its tails. The swallowtails have those tails as a decoy. Very often when we see swallowtails, one or both of their tails are missing, and that means that they survived because of the tails. Something was trying to eat them, and they went for the tails. So the next slide, this is a pawpaw tree in the fall. It's a beautiful lemon yellow color. It actually looks pretty tropical. It has leaves that can be up to a foot long, and they kind of hang at an angle. They are our largest native fruit. They're actually the native fruit of Ohio now. If you look on the right, there's the green fruits that hang in clusters on the tree. And then if you cut open the fruit to look inside, the large seeds kind of look like the paw of an animal, so that's where the name pawpaw came from. And then again, the butterfly. And then the flowers they're magenta, and they hang upside down like a little teacup, and they're pollinated by flies. Many people worry about the smell of the flowers because they think if it's drawing flies for pollination, then it's going to smell bad. But everyone on my team at the nursery has stuck their nose in a pawpaw flower, and none of us can smell a thing. So it must be something only the flies can discern. The next slide is a little bit of information about a pawpaw. The nice thing about that tree is that it can grow in full sun to full shade as well. It tends to be, when you find it in the wild, it's almost always found in woods as an understory tree. And in the shade, it does have a different growth habit because it's reaching for the sun, so it tends to get kind of leggy and long. If it's in the sun, it's more pyramid shaped. So the next slide is the giant swallowtail. The giant swallowtail is the largest butterfly in North America. It has a 6-inch wingspan. The first time I saw it at my place was when I was growing hop trees, and I had actually forgotten because you order in July for spring, and so by the time the plants came in spring and we potted them up, I had forgotten why I had ordered the hop tree. And then I was talking to a customer, and I was like, wait, sorry. What is that? This giant butterfly flew up and landed on a hop tree in its pot and laid an egg. And I was like, okay, that's why I forgot why I grew that. It was kind of an amazing moment. It was literally the first time I had ever seen one was because I was growing the hop tree. Hop tree, H-O-P. Yes, they used to use the hop tree flowers to substitute for hops. So that's why they call it that. It's in the citrus family. The flowers are really fragrant. What do you think the caterpillar looks like? Does anybody care to make a stab at what the caterpillar's trying to look like? It's trying to look like poop. It's one of the many bird poop mimic caterpillars. And it lays boldly on the leaf. You don't really have to look hard for them because that's what bird poop do. It lays right on the leaf. And they get quite large because they do turn into a really big butterfly. So next slide. This is what a hop tree looks like. The one on the left is actually a picture of the tree that's at the nursery, growing at the nursery. It's much bigger than that now. In the middle is looks like just a close-up of the flowers on the right and in the middle. And then there's the little wafer. It has like the seeds look like the money tree seeds. And then the next slide. Well, I didn't talk very much. I must have left that slide out. The hop tree is actually a very small tree, 10 to 15 feet tall. It's another one that does full sun to full shade, which makes it really versatile. And you can grow it as a single stem, like a tree, or you can let it have that vase shape that you saw in that last picture where it has multiple stems. And it doesn't spread by runners or anything. It stays in one place, but it'll get several different canes, and then it grows kind of like a serviceberry. It kind of reminds me of a serviceberry. But I like to stand in my hop tree when it's blooming because it just smells amazing. The flowers are not showy, but they're very fragrant. So now we've talked about keystone plants. We've talked about planting for specialists. Now I want to talk a little bit about how we create a landscape that mimics what nature would do. Because if you plant a tree and there's caterpillars feeding on it, about 90% of our caterpillars drop to the ground and they pupate in the soil or the leaf litter. And if you don't have soil or leaf litter below your tree and you've got compacted grass that's been being mowed and stepped on, then your caterpillar, that big juicy caterpillar that just spent weeks and weeks getting fat, is a really nice snack for a bird, and it's very likely to get it eaten because it has to walk a long distance to find somewhere to pupate. So we do what we call soft landings underneath our native plants. And that means landscaping in layers. So in nature, think about nature, we don't see like a big oak tree and then mowed grass around it, do we? We see the overstory, we see the understory shrubs, perennials, ferns, ground cover. So that's kind of what we want to mimic when we're creating habitat in our yard. So when we landscape in layers, we want to think about, I like to think about when you're putting in the understory, putting them in together with the tree that's going to eventually shade them out, which makes those full sun to full shade plants so valuable, because you can put them in when they're young. The root systems actually help one another to grow, and they also lock each other in place and sturdy themselves during storms. And then as the shade comes in, the plant is going to be fine in full sun while it's young and in full shade once the overstory grows in. So another thing to think about when you're putting in all these different layers is that different types of wildlife spend 90% of their time in one specific layer of the landscape. So when you're planting all these different layers, you're going to be supporting a lot of diversity. And it's also a lot more visually appealing to us, because think about, you're going to have different leaf textures, different spring blooming times, bloom colors. You'll have different colors of fruit, different times of fruiting. You'll have different colors of fall colors. It's just going to be a lot more visually pleasing to us as well. So those are things to think about. And the other thing I think about too is I like to be lazy. I mean, I like working in the yard, yes, but why create more work than you need to? It's kind of fun to enjoy and explore instead of having to always work. When you put all those layers in, you're holding the leaves in place and hiding them, so it looks more intentional. You can kind of, if you need to rake away from a patio or a walkway, you can push that up into those areas so that it looks more like a cue to care. So another thing to think about when you're planting is, like, many people I think they feel overwhelmed by, how do I go from compacted grass to a new planting bed? They think they have to cut out the sod, or they have to spray it and wait, or put plastic over it. This is how we do it. We call it lazy lasagna gardening. So we just lay cardboard down, and there's a couple different ways you can do it. If you already have existing shrubs or trees that you want to go around, then this is a way that you can do that. You can cardboard around them and then put your mulch or chips or dirt or whatever you're going to put on top, and then wait a couple months, and then you can plant into it. You can plant new things and then cardboard around them if you want to do that. Leave the grass and just cardboard over it. It takes about 2 months for the grass to die, and then you can just plant right into it. And that grass composts down. You have really nice, rich, crumbly soil. This is basically from scratch, so this person just went ahead and put that down. Some people wet it down to help it stay in place while they're getting the mulch on. Some people use newspaper, some people use cardboard. You can use either. I wouldn't use any of the shiny cardboard, or pull all the tape off, all that stuff. Then I want to talk a little bit about ecological traps, because if we're going to create this habitat, we don't want to lure nature into an area where it's not safe for them. Thanks for being intuitive on the slides. So window wells, those can be a trap for especially baby animals. If you put a stair step of bricks so that they can climb out, or a wide board going across, or put some kind of I always forget what it's called, the really fine metal mesh that you can put over to keep them from falling in. So think about window wells, think about outdoor lighting. Outdoor lighting, we don't know why moths are so attracted to it, but moths are such a huge, they're the biggest contributor to the insect biomass for nature. So we want to think about, turning off outdoor lighting, putting it on motion activation, putting in a yellow tinged light, because they're not as attracted to that. We don't know why they do it, but it will end up exhausting them, and then they don't have the energy to mate. And some of our largest silk moths, which we actually share out at the nursery for people to raise, they are not born with any mouth parts. So they can't eat, they can't replenish their energy reserves, so they have the amount of energy that they have, and if they don't use it to mate, they use it banging against a light, then their little window of life as a moth is wasted. So think about that. Bug zappers, When I first moved out in the country, a friend of mine gave me a bug zapper, and I put it up, and I emptied it like 2 or 3 times, and every time I opened it up to see what was in there and dump it out, it just broke my heart to see all these beautiful moths and bugs in there. I took it down, and then I was doing some reading online. They were looking at like how many actually biting insects get caught in that. Very, very few. It's mostly non-biting insects that are killed by bug zappers. Sprayed native plants are another thing we don't think about. If we're buying plants from nurseries that spray them, and especially if it's neonics, pesticides persist for a long time in the plant. So when butterflies or moths lay their eggs on the plant, they don't know that they're poisoned. But when the caterpillars hatch out, they're going to die pretty quickly because it's poisoned. So thinking about that. And then we are in the Mississippi Flyway for migrating birds. So think about when birds are migrating through, they can't tell from up in the sky whether the plants in your yard are native or not. They come down to rest. If there's nothing there for them to eat because you have all non-native plants and turf grass, that could be the end of their migration right there. So thinking about things like that as you're working on building your habitat. And then, again, I think this is out of order, but I do want to mention that when you do all these things and you have leaves, please don't throw them away, because look at all the things that overwinter in those leaves. You've got Luna moth, you got morning cloak butterfly. There's actually a couple different butterflies that overwinter as adults in the leaf litter. Fireflies, ladybugs, polyphemus moth, lots of different things. And that's just a few of the things that you would throw away if you throw away your leaves. Bring them to me, I'll take them. I've had people bring me their leaves, and I dump it out, and oh, there's a buckeye butterfly. Oh, there's a toad. So I'll take them all. And if you need a place to hold your leaves, this is a picture of a friend of mine's yard. He actually lives here in Granville, and he has done these wattle fences where he's created like low fences around his trees with just a pathway in between, and that's where he puts all his leaves. And as those leaves rot down and create a really rich soil, we're doing that. Thank you again. I'm forgetting to tell them to advance, but they're following along. So the next slide is basically the one that we did at the nursery. This is about, I'm going to say 2.5 years ago. It was in February or March that we did this. And now this area is full of plants. We have ferns, and there's actually 2 more trees in there, a couple shrubs, eastern wahoo, bottlebrush buckeye. We've filled that up with all kinds of neat shade plants. And those leaves, this was a silver maple. The leaves are so light that they tend to blow away, and the wattle fence helps hold them in place so that they rot down and create that nice nutrient recycling. And then this next slide, I put the instructions for how to make a wattle fence, which you're welcome to take a picture of if you'd like to do that at your own place. It's very easy. We just laid out a hose to mark the area, left the hose in place while we put in the supporting stakes. And then the silver maples tend to drop a lot of branches, so we just keep on weaving the branches that fall down into that fence as the previous branches kind of break down. And I have to say, the wattle fence itself, I never realized how many toads it would attract. There are so many toads that like the actual wattle fence itself, because the rotting wood, there must be insects in there, and it seems to be moisture. The leaves are thicker up around the wattle fence. So they really love that area. The next slide is just a few things that you can include in your yard or leave in your yard for bees, for pollinators. Just kind of a demonstration of some of the many different types of habitat that pollinators like to use. So dead wood, logs, stumps. You can leave in the spring I don't personally take down my dead perennials until late spring. I wait until I see the base, the growth coming up at the base, and then I do what's called a chop and drop. The chop and drop is leaving about 6 to 24 inches of the stem and dropping it right where it lays. That puts that plant debris back into the plant nutrient recycling process, but it also creates stems that the pollinators can use. And as the new growth comes in, it's going to cover that up. You'll never know it. And the stems that are left standing and the stems that are on the ground will both be used for, by stem nesting bees. And then, so we want our yards to look neat, right? But we also want them to look a little wild. So we want to kind of balance that by leaving cues to care, because otherwise the neighbors think you don't care. You're just trying to use this as an excuse not to take care of your yard. So think about some of the things that you can do. So like if you've got a meadow that, you know, doesn't always have something flowering in it and you're leaving the stem standing, a cleanly mowed edge can make that look more intentional. It's also nice if you're through the growing season, if you have sequentially blooming plants, so that there's always something blooming in there. I like to try to have 2 or 3 colors blooming at the same time throughout that time. And then you can also do a sign, which is in the next slide, that can just tell people, especially if it's in the early phases and it's not real obvious that you're trying to do something intentional, it can kind of let people know that, hey, this is something we're working on right now. Stay tuned for, you know, a fully completed project later. And then we already talked about that wattle fence. And then the next slide is just a picture. I was out working in the nursery one day and I looked up and I was like, oh my gosh, look at that sunset. I will say, starting this nursery was the best way ever to spend a pandemic. All of my friends wanted help because they were all stuck at home. And then the last slide is just basically a little bit about the nursery. We don't use any pesticides, so some people actually do take home caterpillars on the plants they take home. Actually, I should change this. We're not using fertilizer now. We're using natural fertilizer. It's kelp, manure, leaf compost based. We do incorporate clay into our soil that we propagate from because that acclimates the root systems of the plants to the clay. People will go to pick up my pots and they're like, wow, that's heavy. I'm like, yep, there's clay in there. The root systems are going to be much more likely to want to venture out into your clay if they're already kind of accustomed to some clay. We do focus on straight natives, so not cultivars. And we do grow some plants that are native to the south because as the climate warms, wildlife is shifting to the north. The plants need some assisted migration, so they'll be there when those species arrive, in my opinion. We are always seeking local provenance for nuts, seeds, and berries because we do want to grow things from plants that are acclimated to this climate as much as possible. That we're in a region, so we do grow plants from other states because we just haven't been able to find them here. There are some plants, we do specialize in unusual and state-listed species. So we do have some plants that are extirpated or extinct in the wild here that we grow by accessing the plant material from another state. We do have a lot of demonstration gardens that have signage that will guide you through. You're welcome to come and walk the landscape for some ideas. And we do reduce, reuse, recycle, donated pots, seedlings. In fact, one of the customers brought me a big bag of pots tonight. And then another thing I mentioned that I should put on my slide is that in the months of usually June to early September, we do share out for free eggs and caterpillars of the silk moss and some of the butterflies when we have enough to share. One of the things that's happening right now with basically habitat loss is that we have pockets of habitat that are not connected. And that's what the pollinator pathway initiatives are about, is connecting a corridor of habitat, because it's very dangerous for wildlife to move from a pocket of habitat to another pocket of habitat. There's roads, there's cars, there's deserts where there's no food. There's just a lot of dangers between those pockets. So we do like to share these out because what's happening in those pockets is that the moths and butterflies are becoming inbred. And so sharing the genetics out to other areas does help them to persist and be healthier. Does anybody have any questions?
Could you mention your nursery or your...
It's Leaves for Wildlife, Leaves for Wildlife in Sunbury. Yeah, and we're open Thursdays and Saturdays 10 to 6. Tomorrow's our very last day open this year because we closed the end of the month. But you can shop by appointment. We actually find winter to be the very best time to plant shrubs and trees because they're dormant and they have a long time between now and next summer's heat to establish a healthy root system. And we do have a website. Yes.
I've had caterpillars appear on what I know is a non-native plant, and I wonder if it's doing them any harm, or if they have said, wow, this is good, where do we get it?
Do you see them eating it? Do you see them eating it? Okay, there are some generalists, like we were talking about 90% of our insects are specialists, but 10% of our insects are generalists, so they'll eat other plants. So some non-native plants they do eat, but it's just unusual. I know that a couple exceptions that I've learned are the non-native elm and the non-native willow. The same species that feed on our native elms and willows will feed on the non-natives. Yes? That's a very complex question. I would have to do a little research on that to give you specific species, but we do know that like birds and frogs and toads and things like that are starting to shift. Yes. And, yep. Yes. As the climate gets warmer, plants can tolerate it. They couldn't tolerate it before. But also, what we've decided as a nursery is that if we raise plants that are outside the state, we don't go to the north. It just doesn't make any sense because our climate's warming, and those plants will not be happy here a whole lot longer. I know there's some talk about sugar maples and some of the other species that we're on like the southern growing edge for. If we're on the northern growing edge for it, then that feels better to me to grow.
Are we in zone 5, at least in the southern half?
I'm not sure what the southern half is. We're in the center, we're at zone 5. Is it 5B? They just changed it. I don't remember. I don't go by zones. I go by, historically what's been here and what species we need to support. So I don't really think about the zone. Yes?
Any comments on the colored pear?
I remember back in the days when I used to drive down the freeway and be like, oh, they're so beautiful. And now I drive down the freeway and it just makes me want to vomit because they're awful. I mean, that's one of the worst environmental disasters in our state is that tree. I know Amur honeysuckle, another really, really bad one. I think last year they said that Amur honeysuckle was the predominant species in most of Ohio, which is really sad. Thank you for having me.